If you're looking for a place to hang out, figure out where you can take the next step in your dairy farming business, then you're in the right spot. Welcome to the High Performance Herd podcast. Here we will inform you what you can do today to future-proof your business for tomorrow. A big thanks to our sponsors Fonterra, IDEX, Koru Diagnostics, TasHerd, Tasmanian Dairy Trust, Zoetis, NHIA, Datamars. I'm your host, Andrew Savage. Enjoy this episode of the High Performance Herd podcast wherever you may be listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode, and jump on our Facebook group, the High Performance Herd Project. Today in the High Performance Herd studio, I have Rhys McKinlay and Alison Digney from Koru Diagnostics to discuss the management of mastitis. Rhys is the CEO and Alison is Koru's technical sales lead in Australia. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Andrew.
Rhys featured in episode 5 where he talked about Koru Diagnostics and the Staph Gold test. If you haven't listened to that, go back and check it out. Most of us are familiar with clinical mastitis, and farmers regularly see and treat it. However, subclinical mastitis is the greatest contributor to financial losses in the dairy industry globally. Alison, can you just explain what subclinical mastitis is?
Andrew, subclinical mastitis is an infection of the mammary gland or udder of the cow. It doesn't have any visible appearances and it doesn't lead to massive changes in the milk. Generally, what's happening is that the infection itself is in the udder and it's going to affect the milk quality in somatic cell counts. So generally what you'll see is farmers will get an increasing bulk tank cell count test, and that'll be their first indication that there's a problem. So when we're looking at clinical mastitis, for each cow that you find, the literature suggests that you can have anywhere between 12 and 40 subclinical infections on your farm. So it can be a significant problem and contributor to loss on farm.
Yeah, that's really quite significant, isn't it? And I guess, so what are the main causes of subclinical mastitis?
So there's a lot of different causes of subclinical mastitis. The most common one that's a contagious pathogen is Staphylococcus aureus, or staph, as it's called commonly. It's a leading cause of milk loss and production loss, and it can cause irreversible damage to the udder or teat if left unmanaged. Animals that have it don't necessarily shed it evenly, so you don't see it in every milk. So it's hard to detect. And what's worse is it's very difficult to cure. So cure rates are quite low for it. So really what you want to do is minimize the spread or the impact of this bacteria on your farm.
So yeah, obviously it's hard to find and it's very hard to say as well. I just wonder, how do you go about actually testing for Staph aureus? Here I go as well. Rhys, I'd be keen to know, what do you think about the best way to test for Staph aureus is?
Well, there's a few different methods for testing for staph, but the most accurate and cost-effective way of doing it is through our Staph Gold ELISA test. So it's a lab-based test that detects Staph aureus antibodies, and it's run on either herd test milk samples, if you do herd testing, or composite samples from individual cows. So you can ask your herd tester for more information on that.
Yeah, that's great. And what's so special or different about the Staph Gold test in particular? Why should farmers use it?
Well, the Staph Gold test is different because it doesn't detect Staph aureus pathogens, the bacteria. It detects the animal's immune response to those bacteria. So that's what's the most accurate test for picking up staph positive cows, whether they're shedding the pathogen or not. So it helps farmers pick up subclinical staph cases, and it just uses existing herd test samples, so there's no extra work required for the farmer. And with Staph Gold results, particularly over multiple time points, you end up with a much clearer picture of the prevalence of staph in your herd. And majority of staph cases are also subclinical, vast majority. So screening high cell count cows or even entire herds is a good way to determine what you're dealing with. And the key to minimizing the harm or the impact of staph on farm is picking up those subclinical cows early so you can take action and stop the spread.
Right, it sounds like really powerful information to have. And how and when can I actually get this test done, Alison? This might be something you can answer.
So once again, we mentioned when you're looking at those cell count things, but what we want to do is really maximize herd health. So everyone should be looking at their active herd health management, and they want to look at what program they want to do in collaboration with their vets, right? This isn't about just randomly choosing points. And so it's really important for you to understand what the overall program that you're trying to achieve on your farm. So with the high performance focus farm, what we did was took a conservative approach and a risk-based approach by adding in the normal herd screening and selecting cows that had high cell counts above 200,000 counts per mil. And we tested each of those cows that had those high somatic cell counts and looked at whether they had that staph infection using this technology.
Yeah, it seems like a good approach. And when we tested those cows over 200,000, we had 96 cows in that bracket. And those 96 cows are the ones that we went on to test for staph with the Staph Gold test. Is that number typical? 97 out of, or 96 cows out of nearly 1,000, or it's about 950 cows. So is that what you're seeing out there as far as, you know, those cows above that threshold? Is that about right?
Well, 96 cows out of 950 is actually a pretty good number. It's certainly lower than we would expect. Most herds we've been testing sit around 15 to 20% of the whole herd having that elevated cell count. So obviously there can be quite a few contributing factors to individual animal cell count, but if your percentage is around the 10% mark or lower, you're doing something right in minimizing those risk factors to bacterial infection.
Yeah, that's well. They're obviously doing something really well on the high performance herd farm. And this is the first time information on subclinical Staph aureus is available to the farmer. What does having this information really mean?
Well, it means that the farmers have a heads up now on which are their staph positive cows, so they can actually do something about it. They can take action now to stop those cows spreading staph to other cows in the herd. So doing that again will minimize potential milk production loss and impact on bulk milk cell count and herd health. Obviously, if you do that well, there are other benefits down the line with respect to quality bonuses, etc. And at today's milk prices as well, this is really something farmers should be focusing on. In a trial we ran in New Zealand, we quantified production loss in high cell count cows over a single season, and one of our trial farms missed out on producing $100,000 worth of milk in a herd of 1,100 cows. So it's a significant, I guess, threat to production in not proactively managing this pathogen.
Yeah, 100K, it's a lot of extra income. And I guess when we're looking at sustainability and getting more milk from the same or less cows, it's really, really important. So for the focus farm in particular, what would be the next steps? They have 57 positive cows out of those 96. So what's the next step for these 57 positives and suspect positive animals?
Well, first, I just wanted to highlight that this farm actually has pretty good bulk milk cell counts of about 120 to 130,000, I believe. And as we mentioned, only 10% of the herd actually had elevated cell count above 200,000, which is very good. But there is still quite a high incidence of Staph aureus infection on the farm. And without having done that Staph Gold screen, most farmers would be happy with having just a 10% elevated cell count population within their herd and just be none the wiser. But but I would bet that most farmers would want to know in that context, if they actually had more than 50 staph positive animals, they would want to know that right away. So having that information now is really valuable, really useful in terms of the rest of this lactation, how they can manage those cows.
So if we talk about what we're trying to achieve, we identify some positive animals, and these animals have a contagious pathogen. It's a bacteria, it's a common one, it's found on humans. And what we're trying to do is stop the spread from the infected animals to the healthy animals. So this is really about managing it and being able to still get your milk production throughout this lactating season. So I want to look at how we can take the cows and separate them during the milking process. So obviously we could separate the herds entirely and have an infected herd and an uninfected herd, and that would make it easy. But there's other things that we can do. We can mark them, we can use RFID tags, we can use tail paint and things like that. But once again, what we want to be able to do is know each of the infected animals in the herd and make sure that the way that we're milking them, that their milk does not come in contact with the healthy cows. So we want to implement on a farm a strategy that works with the milking setup on that farm and takes into account the number of cows. So obviously when it's a small portion of a very large herd, separating the herds probably into a smaller herd of infected and uninfected is not going to be a suitable way of approaching it. But what we could do is looking at having dedicated, say, instruments, clusters for milking those infected animals so that only infected animals are using that equipment. But we also need to remember that there's a chance that what we believe is a healthy cow may have become infected during the season. And so we want to treat every animal as if it's infected and follow improved milking practice in the milking shed. So what does that mean? It means that we want to flush our clusters. We can do this manually. We can do it automated. We've got to look at what equipment we have available. This isn't about changing the entire operation or adding cost. It's about better milking practice on the farm. We can look at training staff or uptraining staff on better hygiene, teat handling, teat disinfectants, the use of gloves, best practice. A lot of this information is available through, Dairy Australia, Dairy NZ, and it's really important that we understand that this is a contagious pathogen, right? So it is going to spread. It's not only spread by milk, like milk to teat contact. There are other things that we can consider, such as environmental things like flies, bedding and stuff like that. But most of the spread that we're going to see on a farm is going to be from milk coming into contact with healthy udders, infecting new animals. So we need to make sure over the season that the status doesn't change of an animal. A clearly healthy animal can get infected at any time without anyone being to blame for it. So then we need to really go in and say, okay, we want to detect these new infections as early as possible. So continue screening, continue doing your herd tests. If you have increases in somatic cell counts in those healthy animals, get them tested, make sure that they're not staph positive. And then we move on to, once the season is coming towards a draw, is looking at which animals need treatment with selective dry cow therapy, right? Working with your vet on the management and eradication of it involves a treatment at the right time.
That's really cool. And I think, from what you're saying, a lot of systemic approaches there. It's a multi-pronged thing to try and get on top of. I actually did a post in the High Performance Herd group just this week around flies, and there were some pretty interesting, innovative ways that people are using teat sprayers and things like that to actually apply drench to cows as they walk out. So, there's little tips and tricks on all little aspects, staff training, that type of thing, that sound like they can all help prevent the spread. And can farmers just treat positive cows like they do with clinical mastitis, given that they're subclinical? What do you think about that, Reese?
Well, it's pretty well known that the most effective treatment for Staph aureus is dry cow therapy, but there are lots of factors that can come into play and affect how well dry cow works. So we would just recommend that farmers work closely with their vets to determine the most appropriate treatment plan for their situation. And, Staph Gold results are very useful to have in that context in making those decisions.
I'm really curious also, we drew the line at 200,000, but are we possibly missing cows when we only test above that 200,000 cell count mark?
So it's absolutely possible that we could be missing some. Our validation studies show that you're going to detect a majority of infected animals, but there is a potential that you will have some infections without having a significant change in somatic cell count. But, it comes down to the economics of this, right? You want a good balance between the cost of testing and detecting the positive animals. And so this is an approach that we took with the high performance herd. But it really depends on your strategy and your management as to how you want to approach this. If you want to be more aggressive, you could test the entire herd, because once it's there, it's going to spread.
That's right. And it sounds like you're really just taking a snapshot of that current second, and it's sort of what you're saying, there's a lot of transition going on. And if we go to the sort of, I guess, the start or end and start of the season around dry cow and dry cow therapy and subclinical staph, how do I know if my dry cow treatment has actually worked?
So with treatment, you're going to remove the bacteria, so it's no longer going to be causing a problem. So that means that the antibody levels that are circulating are going to drop and no longer be able to be detected with the Staph Gold test. So remembering, we're only detecting the antibodies. So we know if there's an active infection. That's what the test is testing for. So if an animal tests positive after treatment, so we have a withholding period of that testing of sort of 30 to 60 days. After that period, if they test positive, it's likely that they have an ongoing infection, which means that the treatment that you've opted for hasn't worked.
Right, and that's a real bugbear with staph, isn't it? And not all cows can be cured. And how is this test, are you finding, being helping farmers make decision around dry cow in particular and culling, Reece?
Well, if you screen all your high cell count cows at each herd test and milk them last, so you're proactively managing them, by the end of the lactation, you actually have a really clear view on your staph cows, and you will have minimized the spread through your herd. And so dry cow therapy at the end of that season only needs to be administered where it's necessary, but you've got good visibility on the staph status of your herd at that point. And at the start of the new lactation, those cows can be retested to determine whether the dry cow has been successful, as Alison just mentioned. And if they still have staph, then you've got chronically infected, therapy-resistant cows that could continue to be milked to last, throughout the next season and then replaced. And so testing the whole herd prior to dry off might also help you identify additional animals that would benefit from selective dry cow therapy to improve your starting position of the herd, I suppose, at the beginning of the next season.
Yeah, that's really cool advice. It's not all doom and gloom for that cow who is positive. There are ways to manage it and still get income from that cow for the season, which was really, really cool. And what else can farmers do, Alison?
So every situation is different, right? And understanding the status of your herd is the first step to managing the problems. So working with your vets, you can see what you can do on farm as far as treatment of the infections. But there's a lot of great resources available to the industry, both in Australia and New Zealand. So Dairy Australia has a cups on, cups off training, which is a practical hands-on session that they offer free throughout Australia. They also have their guide, which is a countdown guide to how you deal with mastitis. In New Zealand, they also have Smart SAMs by Dairy New Zealand. And reaching out, talking to your herd testing companies, speaking to your vets, speaking to us. What you want to do is improve your biosecurity and best practice to minimize that spread, because what you want to ultimately do is minimize the impact whilst you make decisions on how you actually remove it from the farm.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice. Reese, what do you think? What can farmers do to learn more? Are there any sort of call to actions that you would have for a farmer around this topic?
Well, if they're interested, if staffs are of interest to them, or even if it's not, they can visit our website, staffgold.com, and they can follow us on Facebook for news and information. And I just recommend speaking with your local herd tester about how you can have your herd screened using this test. And obviously, as Alison mentioned, recommend using the mastitis management resources such as those developed by Dairy Australia and Dairy NZ.
That's really good advice. And if they're interested, or if they're not, I'm sure most farmers would be interested in making an extra 100K out of their cows by just visiting your website. I think it's really good advice. So, hey, thanks very much for coming and talking to us today. You've offered the high performance herd community and listeners lots of useful insights and heaps of helpful information on how to manage this problem.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Andrew.
Cool. Cheers. Thanks for listening to the High Performance Herd podcast. Thanks to the sponsors, Fonterra, IDEX, Koru Diagnostics, TasHerd, the Tasmanian Dairy Trust, Zoetis, NHIA, Datamars. Feel free to subscribe and review the podcast. Share it with your friends. The more, the merrier. Jump on Facebook, search the High Performance Herd Project, and you're very welcome to join the High Performance Herd private Facebook group. If you want to see a video of this podcast, jump on YouTube or www.highperformanceherd.com, where you'll see a link to these sponsors for more information on the High Performance Herd Project, which is a real-life dairy farm, spring block calving right here in Tassie. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.